If you're the type of person who's doing all the right things, you made all the right investments, you've made all the right moves, you're using all the right strategies, doing all the things that everyone told you to do, you're using things that people have used in order to see success, but you're not seeing the success, there might be something a little bit deeper going on. Your brain, most of your decisions are made up of your subconscious. 90% of the decisions you make, the actions you take, are made from your subconscious. This is why it is so powerful in messaging. When you know your audience makes their decisions off of their subconscious, then we can start to formulate messaging that works with the subconscious. And that's great when it comes to your audience, but how do we do it for you? How do we get your subconscious working towards your goals without self-sabotage? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today. And I will tell you, some of you may be aware you have the limiting beliefs. Some of you may have beliefs you're not even aware of that are stopping you from seeing success. And we dive into all of that on today's episode. So keep on listening. Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today, we have an amazing interview lined up for you. This is a longtime friend, someone that has helped me personally and has helped a lot of our students over the years as well. Today, we get to talk all about mindset, reprogramming your mind for success, what might be the blocks that are stopping you from seeing success, like you're doing all the right things to have an amazing launch, to have amazing ads, to have a seven-figure business, but you're not able to get there yet and you don't know why. Well, today's episode may be exactly what you need, because today we have Dr. Shannon Irvine on the call today. So Shannon, thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, Brandon, I love it. I love being back on the podcast, and we were just chatting all things mindset. So nothing better than helping our people up level, right?
100%. I think mindset is one of those things I think people like easily just dismiss. And they're like,
Yes.
Give me the strategy. It's kind of like how I think you and I are very similar, where it's like messaging is also the thing they kind of dismiss, and mindset's also the thing that they kind of dismiss. But honestly, those are the two things that are like the root foundation of success.
Yep.
And so everyone just chases strategies all day long. And so I think if you're listening and you're the type of person that's like, I'm doing all the right things, strategies and stuff, and nothing's working, well, let's dive into it. So let's first dive into, well, actually, let me have you introduce yourself. Like, who are you? What do you do? All that good stuff for anyone that may not know who you are.
Oh, I love it. So my name is Dr. Shannon Irvine, and I help entrepreneurs up level to a seven-figure mindset. And I do that through a brain-based model that allows you to train your brain to allow success and to remove the old patterns that are literally keeping your foot on the brake, blocking you from the thing that you want. And we also, at our neurocoach model, we certify coaches in the only brain-based true transformational model, so that you create raving fans for your coaching business that sells out instead of replacing clients all the time. So that's who I am. My background is in psychology with an emphasis in neuropsychology. And I always tell everyone, lest you think I'm like a smarty pants, the only thing that I did was I became so obsessed to solve my own problems that I went and got a PhD. So I call that crazy enough to fix me.
I'm going to go through all this education so I can fix my problems. I mean, it
I can
worked.
fix me, yeah.
So that makes, makes a lot of sense. So what are some of the issues that a lot of entrepreneurs, and let's dive into a lot of the issues that like course creators specifically might be facing. Yeah. So, you talked about foot on the brake at the same time. And I know you have a great analogy of like foot on the brake and gas at the same time. When people have their foot on the brake, what does that look like? Like in physical experience, what does that actually, how does that manifest, so to speak?
Yeah. So here's the thing, especially for course creators, coaches, we have this high performance gene in us that is different than the rest of the population. So our blocks look different. Our blocks look like, it's not a passive block where we sit down and go, oh, forget it, I'm just going to give up, right? I'm just going to go do a 9 to 5. What we do is we do active blocking. In other words, instead of taking one strategy, because by the way, they all work. Okay. So that's why everybody's selling different strategies, because they all work. So what we will do is we will hit a roadblock and we will assume that something is broken with the strategy, and then we'll go buy a different strategy and a different strategy and a different strategy. And then we end up with something I affectionately call course shame, where we've purchased a lot of different strategies and we get them to a certain point, but then we never get past that point. And usually what's happening for someone is they're butting up against what they see as their glass ceiling, and just assuming that it's a different strategy that will work versus the thinking that is operating the strategy. And so that's what I see as one of the number one kind of tests to say, is there a potential that I might have a block in my brain that is repeating a pattern and keeping me chained back from the very thing that I have a high desire to achieve, like a 7-figure business.
Right. Okay. Can I give you a couple examples of my experience with students and just see if these are also examples too? Like, actually, I'm going to go through my personal experience. I remember there was a point where like I had not quote unquote made it yet. I think like for me, making it was like hitting that 7-figure level. I maybe had multiple, like a 6-figure, maybe low multiple, like $100,000, $200,000 a year. And I remember I had Jim Fortin and I had James Wedmore as mentors, which are two great mentors. And then I remember thinking about buying a program and another course to bring on another mentor, and I didn't do it. And the reason why I didn't do it was because I said, if I do this and I have these people and I still can't make it, then it means I'm not cut out for this. Like I'm probably the least qualified person in the world to be doing this. Yeah. And I didn't actually bring on the other mentor. Is that kind of an example of these blocks that you're sort of talking about?
Yeah, it's like we see past the glass ceiling that it's possible for others, but we can't quite see how to get us there. And then old automations will kick in, yours being, if I can't do it with these two, then I'm not cut out for it. Right. And these stories that are in automation in your subconscious, I always like to say you can't outperform them. And that's the frustrating thing for people like us, because if we could just outperform these patterns, just work harder, do more, hustle more, we would do it, because that's kind of the DNA of the entrepreneur. Right. But really what's going on when we hit that sticking point, or it might look like, I'm thinking of a specific client right now who she'll take action up until the point she has to go live, or up until the point where she has to actually put it physically out to the world. And then it's this interesting, remember I said it's an active type thing. It's not a passive. So then all of a sudden it's, well, I've got to work on fill in the blank that is taking her sideways instead of through the gateway of judgment, through the gateway of being called out for not knowing something. And so these patterns, the part of our brain that thinks that it's ridiculous and can reason with these patterns didn't fully develop till we were 24 for men and 21 for females. And so yeah, it's crazy. So when these patterns are being formed about money, about worth, about enoughness, capacity, all of those things, it's happening in childhood and very young adulthood, where honestly our brains are being marinated, legit marinated with the opinions and patterns of the people in our environment, our parents, our environment of origin. And most people go their whole entire lives with those patterns and they take them into the grave. Versus people like you who do the work, or James, our friends that get in there and say, wait a minute, this pattern that I'm not worth it, this pattern that I'm going to get judged. Let me get rid of that in my brain so it doesn't fire anymore when I'm going to get to from 5 to 6 figures and 6 to 7 figures, because that pattern literally is putting neurochemical brakes on the actions and the skills that you need in order to get the 7 figures to actually happen.
Yeah, I mean, it makes so much sense as here you kind of go through what's happening and how it works. Because even with our students, they see it all the time. It's like, they're like, I tried this and it didn't work. I was like, yeah, but did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? No.
Yeah.
Why not? And it was like, I just not ready for that yet. I'm like, well, that's the process. The process is like, put it out there to test, be okay just exploring and having the wrong thing go out. And like, that's a part of the learning process. And they're like, I just can't do it.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
and part of me as a coach, I'm like, just fucking do it.
Just do it.
Like,
just do it. It's on the other side.
Yeah, they're like, but I can't. And I'm like, I don't know what the block is. I mean, I do, but I like, that's not my specialty, obviously. So I don't know how to bring them through a release process. I'm like, well, maybe go visit Shannon or something, or
go talk to Shannon.
Yeah, go to their podcast or something.
Yeah, because here's the great thing about who we are as entrepreneurs. We're dreamers. We're problem solvers. You and I both don't need to really do a whole lot of motivation for people to be inspired toward the thing that they want.
Right.
Or for us, right? We're just like, okay, next, like I see it, like we can see the thing that we want, but it's like, and we're on camera. So if you're watching this on camera, it's like the thing that you want is up here, but the patterns, the safety that your brain wants is way back here. Yeah. And so when we stretch a rubber band between those two things, there's tension. Mm-hmm. And what happens for most people is they say, Brandon, I know you told me to go do this process, and they're feeling that tension and they're saying, I can't. And what they're doing is they're collapsing their dreams down to the pattern instead of taking the pattern and removing it so it can actually catapult it up to their dreams.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. And the thing that that I want to highlight that what you said is like the safe and the subconscious and the safety. Yeah. And what I tell people all the time when it comes to messaging, I'm like, look, your audience, whenever you talk or put out content, they're processing 90% of that subconsciously. And if it's not landing, it's not landing to their subconscious. And then if you're not getting sales, it's because you're not saying the right information so that their subconscious is processing it in the way they need to process it to move forward. And a lot of it comes to safety. So if your messaging is overwhelming people, that's not moving them to safety. If it's making them feel like they can't do it, it's moving them to safety. Like I was listening to someone's presentation last night, one of our one-on-one clients, and like the first 45 minutes or like 30 minutes of her presentation was all about like, look, you're probably thinking this, or you're probably thinking this, I'm like, you just told them all the things that they are thinking that are not safe. You're probably thinking it's way too hard. And it's like, even if they weren't thinking that, now they are. It's like, so you just
now their safety gate is triggered.
Yeah. And now you just move them into this whole area of not safety. And I don't think enough people understand is like like what Shannon just said is like your mind is literally trying to keep you safe, and change is not safe. And that's a lot of times the reason why you get plateaued. Am I summing that up accurately?
Yeah, so perfectly, because we think that our thinking mind and our subconscious mind are the same, and they're not. Mm-hmm. However, this is what I love to get to do with our neurocoach model. They can be, but that requires you actually going in, knowing how your brain allows something to happen, and removing the process that someone else put there. When I always say it's not your fault that you're like afraid or that you feel overwhelmed. That's another good one for us entrepreneurs. We just take on too much and keep taking on, and now we feel overwhelmed, but that keeps us from the action. Mm-hmm. Your brain's job, naturally, your subconscious's job is to process the 60,000 thoughts and bits of information that are coming in every single hour. So its job is to automate not what you want, not what the vision board has, not what your annual goals say. Your brain's job is to automate what is constantly being repeated in your subconscious. Because that to your brain is safe.
Right.
Even if it is, you never put your face on camera. Even if it is, never niche down. Even if it is any of those things that we know work, your brain will throw so many chemicals your way until you unhook from that story that is running. This is the thing, Brandon, 90% of your daily decisions, and therefore your actions, and therefore your results are being created not from our thinking mind, our prefrontal cortex, but from that subconscious place.
That's just so mind-boggling. Like even the 60,000 thoughts an hour, or sorry, was that a day? Was that a day or an hour?
Oh, sorry, it was a day. Like an hour. Oh my goodness.
Even I know, even 60,000 a day is just crazy. Like, I mean, you know this, and a lot of the listeners know that I work with Don Javier as a shaman, and a lot of things that he talks about is silencing the mind. And he goes, look, it's very simple. He's like, I'm not asking you guys to do anything. I'm just asking you to do nothing. And you guys can't do it. It's like, it's so hard. Like my mind's always like moving and going. And it's so hard to like quiet that noise. And then the other thing that I think people don't, again, like you just mentioned, is 90% of those decisions. Again, even to reference this back to messaging and selling, it's like, that's what your audience is doing too. Like not only are we doing it, but your audience is always making these decisions. And if you're not going to learn how to communicate or to work with this, then you're just, it's going to be an uphill battle. So Shannon, if people are listening and they're like, okay, this sounds great. I'm doing a lot of, and I am kind of struggling with a lot of the things that Shannon's talking about right now. What do we start to do to like fix that problem? Is there a process you take people through or something they can start doing like today to start working?
There's some hacks that I can give you today. And then if you want to dive deep, I can do that with you too. But we use a part of our neurocoach model is called the mind matrix. And this mind matrix is what we call in the scientific world, how you synaptically prune. How do you prune patterns or remove patterns, eliminate patterns that are on autopilot in the subconscious running that 90%. And so I think the first key kind of neural hack to be aware of is start to become aware of what you're hearing behind your ears. Like when you're going, and here's the great news. As an entrepreneur, you have so many more opportunities to hear the patterns than most average people because you are taking risks. You are doing what most people won't or are not willing to do. So as you lean into that resistance that I was talking about, that's when you'll hear by the way, nobody says I have imposter syndrome. Like no one in their mind, in their mind, they say, who the hell do you think you are to be like so big for your britches? Like that was mine because, I had Southern parents. And so it's like, you're being so big for your britches. Oh, you think you're all that. Right. And so I don't want to be a bad person. So you see how I'm in conflict with the value that I have because I want to be a good person. I want to be good to people. And I think I've shared this story with you before too. And really where the mind matrix came from was I was driving through a neighborhood that I told my mentor at the time that I buy a house in that neighborhood when I got my business past 7 figures. Because at the time I was capped at 200,000. I could not get past it no matter what. So, go get a PhD. That was the idea. But so I was fine. I used to do that all the time, right? We have our limits of comfortable that our brain doesn't see as a threat. So I love driving through neighborhoods. I could daydream all day long, but the difference was she said, make an appointment with a realtor and go in and act like you're buying the house, right? And so now all of a sudden, as soon as I shake the man's hand, all of a sudden on the backs of good people that make 200,000 or more, that's what I heard. And I was like, oh, that's my dad. That we would drive around in the weekends and see these pretty houses. And he would say, yeah, on the backs of good people, these people that make 200,000. Brandon, I couldn't get at the time past 199,900. And I would do something. I wouldn't show up. I would play smaller. I would do something that would just keep the thermostat under that $200,000 mark. And so the big key is to start hearing what you're saying to yourself. It might not be, I have imposter syndrome, but it might be, oh, you think you're that important? You're not that important. Right? So these are the subject, the things that you were hearing growing up. It's not your fault. And I always like to say 2 really big disclaimers. Number 1, whether you had the best family, worst family, or somewhere in between, you don't have to deep dive back there. And that's great news because your subconscious doesn't require you to do that for you to change it. That's good. And it's not your fault. So you don't have to judge the thoughts that you hear because they're not even yours. They're someone else's. And so as you just become curious, this is something I know Brandon and I take a hard stand on, like allow your curiosity to kick in. Wow, well, that is really interesting that my brain just told me I would become a bad person when I make over 200,000.
Yeah.
Because what's happening is the thinking part of your brain is hearing it for the first time. See, most of us, like you talked about the mind being so busy, these thoughts, they come in and out and we do nothing with them because we're just on to the next thing and on to the next thing. Versus like when you're going live, when you're doing the process that Brandon's got you going through and you're in the stick point, you're in the I just can't point, and you start leaning in toward it, you'll hear it. Your subconscious has to get loud to get you to simmer down.
Right.
And be safe again.
Yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I kind of want to bring us on a small segue, and I'm going to come back to where we are.
Okay, deal.
Because the story you told with your, it was a thought that your dad,
Yeah.
not even a thought, it was a statement that you would hear all the time. And then your mind kind of like, I'm assuming just put it somewhere and just like, okay, this is, normal or reality or I don't know, whatever.
Normal. Yeah,
normal. Yeah, I know you're a parent, and I love to talk about parenthood and things like that on the podcast too. Where my mind automatically went was like, okay, I need to be very mindful of like the things that I bring to my kids, but I also don't want to indoctrinate my kids into like things. I also want to have them be their own person. So like, if my kids don't want to be entrepreneurs, I'm not going to force them to be an entrepreneur. I'll expose them to all these things, but I'm also very mindful. But I'm also very aware that like, I can't stop every bad limiting belief from them taking it on. So how do you like, as a parent, how do you manage that? Is there like, are you very aware and careful with what you say? Do you not really care? Like how do you approach that?
I love this question so much because as a parent to walk around like you're talking about with like, I don't ever want to say something that could possibly ever, we are going to say something that they're going to end up in a counselor over. Right. I mean, we will. Right. And so I always joke around with my son. I'm like, if it has to be the cell phone, then you can get counseling over not having access. That's fine. Yeah. But I'm kidding. But the key is awareness. So just as that neural hack is to start to become curious and aware of the thinking, it's awareness with your kids of hearing what they're saying, because the kids process out loud up until 12 and then they stop and it goes internal. So if you have kids that are under 12, my encouragement to you is you have this window that closes and they are externalizing the patterns. You'll hear them doing it all the time.
And so like their own statements and stuff, like they just
it's their statements, or even when they start to when kids get frustrated, if it's not hunger, if it's not, biological needs, if those are taken care of, then there's a skill or an understanding that they don't have. And that's why they get frustrated. Right. Okay. So it's hard in the moment to like hear that. And you're like, could you just not, but that's what they're saying is I don't have safety here. I don't have equilibrium. And so because their brain is this processor that is just at its height, at its best of figuring out information and deciding whether to keep it or not. That's when most of the synaptic pruning for our entire life happens, is between 4 and 12 years old. Wow. So they naturally external process. So you'll hear the stories and more importantly than being aware of what you're saying is being aware of what they're saying and being able to speak life, speak truth, speak a different perspective when you hear a pattern present. Because as us that have kids that are over 12, there's a point where they're pushing toward independence and they keep all of that in their head. And that's usually when they hit middle school and all of the, joyful days of criticism come in. And so that 0 to 12 time is such a great time to literally plant in fertile soil thoughts about what money is and what money isn't, thoughts about their worth thoughts about their capacity, thoughts about what other people's opinions mean and don't mean. Because it's more about, as a parent, being really on purpose on the big ones that take us out in life.
Yeah.
It's worth, love, identity, and enoughness, right? Those are the core things that we're always trying to feel full on, and we're going to look for other ways to solve. So just being aware and being able to speak that into your kids. And here's the great news: from 0 to 12, they soak it up.
Yeah,
they're not thinking like, "Oh, you're stupid," or any of the things my teenagers say,
Yeah.
right? Like, I love my son. He's always like, "Yes, Mom, I know. Speak positive affirmations. Speak them out loud." Like, he just like monotonely like repeats. But you know what? He gets it.
Yeah.
And that's the key. I remember there was a period when we moved here that he gotten pretty bullied, not physically, but mentally, emotionally. And him having that reflection to say, that's not who I am, gave him the courage to come out and speak out about it and ask to be moved out of that situation. So it's so powerful to train a young mind in the way that they should go.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's so important, especially even with having those tools when it comes to bullying and stuff. I think like every little kid is gonna get bullied at some point, which is it's just terrible. Even if you're like quote unquote part of the popular, it's like someone's gonna say something that's gonna hurt your feelings or whatever.
Yeah.
And so having that is really powerful. On the same topic is this external. You said they'll kind of tell you externally from 4 to 12. Would fears, concerns, worries be a form of external? And I'm just going to ask a person like this. I'm going to take advantage of having you here and just ask a personal question.
Absolutely.
Our daughter, who's 7, is like so concerned with, being embarrassed or like how she looks, or, like the other night she's at the table and she said something that was by accident. Like she said the wrong word and then she thought it was funny. And so she was laughing and then everyone at the dinner table kind of laughed too. And then she got upset when everyone else is laughing. And I was so confused because I was like, but you were laughing and you thought it was funny. But the second everyone else started laughing, then it was like she went into tears. I'm like, what is going on? So in that scenario, is there certain things that we could be doing to fix it, improve it? What's going on there? Do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love this. I don't love it for her, but I love that she expressed that way, because what she's communicating is, I have a fear of, she's showing an external fear. And so that fear of whether it's criticism or it's being abandoned or being like not doing the right thing, and then people will make fun of her, that's a fear for her. So there's a strengthening that needs to happen around identity there, right? And so all of the kids, they give us these clues, and because you are aware enough, you could see that as kind of her internal voice saying, it was fine when I thought it was funny, but as soon as the people that matter most to me think it's funny, now I feel stupid, right? Or I feel less than. And so and she's probably, if she's 7, she's in school, so she's probably getting that too, and having to like modulate, herself. She's probably knowing you, she's probably got a big personality. And so she's probably already gotten that message, don't be too much, right? And so that's when, as you and your wife can come alongside and say, you know what? It's not a let me tell you don't and do. It's I know what you're feeling, and it's scary when other people judge you, huh? And then she can decided to develop a pattern that's going to be helpful instead of making her play less than.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate you letting me ask you a personal question.
Yeah, absolutely. We're friends, so
take advantage of this opportunity and see what
a lot of your tribe, they're all parents. And so it is kind of meta with this work that we get to do with training our brain to allow success and removing the blocks that get in the way, because why are we doing it in the first place? Not everybody, I know your listeners might not have kids, but a lot of them do, or a lot of them are impacting or influencing people. And that's the driver behind why they're wanting a 7-figure business to begin with. And so it's important stuff, because as we learn how to remove the patterns that don't serve the vision that we see behind our eyes, then we can do the same thing for our children. It's kind of like an oxygen mask thing, right? Like, you got to put the mask over. One of the things with kids, especially as they get older, but it's already happening at 4 and 5, is they're watching what you do more than what you say.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's vital for their well-being as well as your own success in business that you once and for all ditch the patterns that have you play small, that have you only play to a certain level, or only take so many risks before you start to shrink back, because they're going to follow that.
I love that. And it's so interesting too, because like I said earlier, I don't tell my kids who they need to be or how they need to be or any of that stuff. I try to instill more of like values and thinking into them that would make them successful no matter what they do. But at the same time, like, I am not going to shy away from the fact of like, here's what I am, an entrepreneur, and here's our past, and here's like what we went through. And a big piece of this quote unquote story that I tell them is like, it's not about getting rid of fear, you know, thinking that fear shouldn't exist. It's about being able to move forward even when the fear is present. And like, in order to have this, like, and I also want to let them have some sort of like appreciation for what we have. And like most families aren't able to do the things that we do. Most families don't have a mom home full time and a dad who's like kind of pretty much here all the time, and vacations and all. Like, this is the reality of, and what I tell them is like, and here's how we were able to have those things. And then I use it as a story to tell the lesson of fear, do it anyways. And I didn't even recognize what was happening until you and I were chatting just in this moment, which was like, they actually come to me now and they tell me, Dad, today at school, I was afraid of doing X, Y, and Z, but I did it anyways. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. And I'm starting to realize, like, you're right. Like, not that I was doubting you, but I'm like, oh, that's an example right there of them just paying attention more to what I'm doing and how I'm being rather than what I'm saying. Because I never told them this is what you need to do. I never said you need to have fear and do it anyways. I said this is what we did in order to have the amazing things that we were able to have. And so that's really cool.
That is so good. That's so good. And here's the thing. It's the biggest lie ever espoused to entrepreneurs. It is this idea that you will feel no fear, and that's when you will do the bigger things. And it's so literally, in terms of the brain science, it's so literally the opposite of that. In fact, at the pinnacle where synaptic pruning happens is the height of where your brain is flooding you with this kind of like, are you sure you want to get rid of this? And so you will feel the feelings, the physical, it's a physiological response. Thoughts are energy. This is not woo. It's just the brain science of how it works. Your thoughts are literally energy, and energy lands in the body. That's why you're physically feeling it in your chest or your back or different parts of your stomach, because it has to physically land somewhere. And we as entrepreneurs have to take risks to advance. There is no getting around that. We have to learn. Yes, it's skill, it's action, and it's mindset, right? And so I love that your tribe is here learning the skill of messaging. I agree with what you said at the top of the hour. If you mastered your messaging and mastered your mindset, nothing could get in your way. 100% agree. And we've been taught that I got to feel the vibe. I've got to feel this nothingness to know I'm on the right place. You will literally be taken off track every time if that's what you're following, because everything that you want is on the other side of pruning away the thing that's keeping the tension.
I'm so glad you said that. I think it's just such terrible advice that's been floating around the space is like, I just need it to be a vibe and easy and flow. And if it's easy, everything will flow to me. And it's like, no, like I always say, if you ask for $1 million business and you're not the person that has the skills, the mindset or whatever, God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, will say like, I'm going to give you that $1 million business, but like you don't have the capability to have that yet. So I'm going to put this stuff in front of you to allow you to grow, to now have the skills and the stuff and all of that stuff. And like, you're just so right. It's like, if you're just sitting there going like, it's going to be a vibe and a flow the entire time. It's like, all you're doing is just being victim to the subconscious programming that you have in your head, which is going to keep you trapped exactly where you are. As I'm hearing you talk, I'm kind of like self-analyzing where I fit into all of this. And I come at a point now where if I go through a hard time or fear, it almost doesn't have the same weight that it did when in the beginning. No. It's like almost normal now, where I'm like, okay, cool. We're going to run $150,000 in ads. And if we lose it, then I'll figure it out. It's not a big deal. Whereas like that would have paralyzed me a couple years ago. So do you eventually get used to, like, is that a normal thing? Like you just
such a great question.
So many times just like the fear becomes normal. Is that?
Yeah, such a good question. I always equate training your brain to allow success to working out. Everybody knows they need to work out. Everybody knows kind of the inherent laws. But if you do start to go work out in the very first week or two, and let's say you're weightlifting, right? And you're building muscle, you're sore. You look like you just got off a horse kind of sore. Like it's not pretty, right? And everything in those 2 weeks or so is testing, are you going to continue this? I mean, there's physiological things happening, and same thing happens in your brain, right? As you build this tolerance that risk is normal, that fear always meets you there, because its job is to say, are you sure, right? Are you sure that you want to spend the $150K? Are you sure that you want the multi-million-dollar launch, right? There's always going to be, your brain will always give you the ripcord to pull. And it can't give you the ripcord without inducing fear to try to bring you back down. But just like when you work out, after you've been at it for a few months, you're not getting as sore. It's still heavy. When you go to lift, it's still heavy. And that's the fear, right? You still feel the fear, still lands in your chest when you're you're telling Terrell, yes, here's the budget, right? But, but at the end of the day, you're solving versus stagnating. And I think that's the difference.
I love that example too, because it just makes so much sense, because even when you, like you said, you work out and you're just like, oh my God, what happened? The pain is like intensified. Whereas if you've been doing it for 2 years, you still even have those moments of like, do I really want to get up and go work out right now? And you're like, yeah, sure, whatever. And then even after a hard workout, you're like, I'm pretty tired now, but it's not the same level of pain as it was in the beginning, but there's still that kind of like check-in of like, do we want to do this? This like, I am feeling it. So I mean, that makes so much sense. That's beautiful. I love that. All right. So I promised we'd come back to where we were after the segue. So where we left off in the process of fixing it all was awareness was kind of like the first thing that we came to. So once we have the awareness of what's going on, is there another step after that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Mind Matrix is made up of 4 key steps. So first is just that becoming aware. And I just want to bring up the caveat of like, if you find yourself judging yourself, I want you to notice that too, because these thoughts aren't your thoughts, right? So your brain is just serving you the thoughts to keep you safe. So get curious about the thoughts. Oh, that's interesting. I'm telling myself I want to make over $200,000 a year. I want multi 7 figures, 8 figures even, yet I think I'm going to become a bad person. Is that true? So now, first of all, you got to recognize it. Then there's a part of this that we resist, but it's powerful. We call it step 2, which is recording, writing the physical thought down, not generalizing the thought, because that's what our brain does. Your brain starts to generalize it, and then you just move on and you keep it.
We hate generalizations here. Hate generalizations.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, generalizations are not good, whether it's messaging or mindset.
Yeah. So can you give me an example of what a mindset a generalization might be?
Yeah. So I might have heard in my mind, no one's going to listen to me. I don't have anywhere near enough to be able to go live and share my knowledge.
Okay.
That might be what's going on behind my ears.
Got it.
What comes out as an overgeneralization is, oh, I just have imposter syndrome.
Oh,
I'll
I
work
see.
on that.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's almost
Right.
like a dismiss.
So what
Like you're just going to dismiss it as like something very simple or.
something very simple and put it in a big bucket. That's what we like to do because it's like, oh, well, everybody has that. Yeah.
Right.
Everybody does have that. You're absolutely right. But it's the language that you're telling yourself. This is why it's so important to do this work because, and I'm not going to go left, but there's a lot of bad coaching out there that's telling you to just do what they do.
Yeah.
Teaching is different, but when I'm talking about coaching, because the thoughts that I have aren't the thoughts that you have.
Right.
You didn't have my parents. You didn't have my environment of origin.
Yeah.
That is what my subconscious is built on. And so just telling okay, I'm not going to go, but don't be the coach that does that. Get certified the right way. But anyway, I digress.
See Shannon biting your tongue right now. It's just
I know, I'm like, don't do it. But there is a right and wrong way to coach.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I want you to coach to transformation, not to a temporary result. Okay.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm talking about here though.
Yeah.
So when we record it, when we physically write the thought down, so my example earlier about 200K, right? Mm-hmm. So I wrote down on the backs of good people, when I make $200,000 a year, I will be working on the backs of good people. Mm-hmm. I physically wrote all that down. Because why we want to do this is the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, now sees it. Now we're involving all these different structures of the brain. You're physically seeing it. You're actually doing the work of writing it down. So you're using memory systems. So what we're doing is we're hacking into deeper parts of the subconscious story by writing it physically down. And everybody's like, I'll just do it in this. No, write the thing down because your brain will immediately go to work because you do have a fully developed prefrontal cortex now in refuting that story. So when you see the true pattern and you write it down, which is the second step, then you start to refute it. You start to come up with evidence. And I do this on two planes. We call it logical and mirror or emotional. Because there's two parts that get stored in the subconscious. It's just not all logical that gets stored in the subconscious. It's 10% of that and 90% of it's emotional. And that's why you're triggered so fast because emotions take you, right? So first we recognize it, then we record it, then we go through and we refute it. We start coming up with all the evidence. I mean, like be the best badass lawyer that you could ever be for yourself to start saying, and just ask yourself, is that true? And
refute it, step 3, or is that still part of like the second?
That's step 3. Yeah. Step 3 is refute it. And we dive deep into logical and emotional, but basically start going after, is that true?
Okay.
And come up with all the evidence that it is not true. Like, no, we have a charity we've been running for 19 years that helps AIDS orphans in Uganda. Every dollar I make means more orphans get help. Like that's the kind of evidence I'm starting to come up with. You'll notice that it's easier to come up with logical evidence than it is emotional evidence. So we kind of have a little hack around that. But once you've really kept writing all the evidence that you would submit in a court of law against this lie, because that's a lie, right? Yeah. It's not true, right. But yet it's running 90% of my decisions, and that's not good.
Well, no, it's not. And I love this because it's just it's so funny and fun and awesome how aligned your processes for mindset that ours is with messaging, because that's one of the things we say too, is like, even with thought reversals, it's like, pick a belief that is causing someone suffering that they have not realized yet. And then you discredit it. And one of the ways you can discredit it is by finding examples where that situation was not true. And the great thing about beliefs is that they're not truths, which means there's always an example of it not being true. And so even like with chunking up, it's like, is that true for everyone all the time? Did every single person who get da-da-da-da-da? And so it's just beautiful. I just love how aligned we are between the two.
Yeah, I do get asked that a lot. Do you use NLP with what you're doing? I'm like, well, we use it a little bit when we're helping you unpack the truth. And because as you're moving in and unpacking the truth, you really create almost this manifesto of what is true versus the lie. Yeah. And then the final step that we take you through is wiring the truth so that it's cool because remember, thoughts are energy. Yep. The only way a subconscious thought becomes a subconscious thought is about 67 repetitions of that same energy. Okay. That's it. So it's like if there's 67 repetitions of that same energy, your brain, if I could give it a voice, says, Brandon believes this because he's repeated it.
Yeah.
That's it.
And so is that why your program's called 67-Day Year?
Yeah, we call it the 67-day year because we can help you create a year's worth of goals and accomplish them in 67 days because we move the patterns out of the way that are blocking them, amongst other things.
I've always heard you say 67-day year, and I'm like, I love the name. I love the name because it's like, it's short time for something that takes a long time, but I never knew why 67. I never asked you until, so now I know. That's exactly why.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, cool. So
it's awesome.
Let me just recap. So have very simple, have the awareness first, then get curious about it, record it down physically. Then you really know what it is. Then you can start to refute it. So finding examples of when it's not true. And then then you want to wire in the truth, which is now, is that basically just having like a different affirmation, a different belief that you're repeating to yourself about 67 days?
Yeah. So we create a couple things in our world. We help you create a vision prime because we want a freeway, like without an on-ramp or an off-ramp. We want a freeway toward what it is that you want. We call that a vision prime. But what we're talking about here is we also create a truth prime. So here's the great news. You don't have 20 or 30 of these limiting beliefs. We think we do, but when we get underneath it all, it's usually like one or two core ones, which is great news because you're not doing this forever. It's like we get after one or two. We can hear them so quickly because we're trained to. And so as you put the truth prime and install that truth prime, it's kind of like taking a jackhammer to a freeway. As that truth prime, you're listening to it, you're speaking it out, and it's literally every repetition is jackhammering an old pattern to the point where I can actually show it to you I wish I had it uploaded. I'd show it to you. You'd be like blown because you can see if I was scanning your brain, this hardwired pattern, like looks like glue. The thought doesn't even jump the synaptic gap anymore. It just fires, right? And you can see it literally start to disintegrate and then separate. And here's the cool thing. It separates so far that thoughts can't reattach it.
Wow. That's awesome.
And that's what I mean by that's transformation.
Yeah, like true lifelong transformation. I love that.
Yeah, not just a Band-Aid.
I want to go back to one thing you said, which is we think we have all of these limiting beliefs, but you said it comes down to like 2 or 3. Yeah. I just want to give an example and just to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. So let's say the core issue that one of them that they have is like self-worth issues. I'm not worthy. Yeah. That could represent itself as like, no one wants to listen to my content. Yep. I shouldn't be able to have any money. I don't deserve that car. But most people look at those as all individual things. But what you're saying is like, no, they really come from just a core self-worth thing. That's kind of what you're saying. So this is what is, to me, this was probably my biggest discovery in creating the neurocoach model is I believe the same thing. I have all these different things. And what you could clearly see is the best representation is kind of like an octopus. It has tentacles that look different, but at the core of it, it's the same core idea that is motivating all of these adaptive responses. And that's what your brain does. It says, I don't want to get hurt in this safety area, my worth. So I'm going to adapt in money. I'm going to adapt with friends. I'm going to adapt with how much I put myself out there, my capacity. And so your brain does this, but it really does all kind of pull back down into that one core human need, which is either worthy or love or enoughness. Yeah. I love it. Shannon, thank you so much for coming in. I mean, this makes so much sense, and I got a lot out of it. So I thank you for let me take you on that segue, ask those personal questions. Hopefully it was also, super valuable for the audience. I know you have 2 different programs, so you actually can train coaches on this, which I think is really, really valuable. Like you said earlier, is like, I don't like a lot of people just kind of hop into this coaching thing, and coaching is not about giving people advice on what to do. It's about, it's like a self-discovery, a transformation. It's a lot of, like Shannon talked about, like helping them reprogram stuff. Even inside of our program, there's not like a one way to do anything. It's like, look, if you don't want to do without versatile and be aggressive, then don't do it. Here's a curiosity. Like, you have to find something that like fits in with who you are and your fears and your concerns and stuff. So I know that you help coaches with that. I know you also bring people through their own transformations. You have training coming up. If people wanted to learn more about everything that you do, I know you have a training as well. Where can they go to learn more?
Yeah, so you could go to drshannonirvine.com or any of the socials. I'm there as at Dr. Shannon Irvine. And we'll have an event coming up where we're going to be deep diving into this kind of 7-figure mindset and how to up level the thinking to get you there here in September. So I'm looking forward to that. But if I could support in any way, let me know.
Who's that training for? Is it for course creators?
That training is for course creators, coaches, and entrepreneurs who are ready to get to the next level and know that they need to up level their thinking to get there.
Cool. So if you guys want to go through a process similar to what we covered today, I highly recommend that training. It's the best way to get to it. Just go to your Instagram, click on the link in the bio or your website or something.
That'd be the best way. And I'll give you a link for the show notes so that it's ready to go too.
All right. And we'll put it in the show notes for you as well. So Shannon, thank you so much for being here. Again, I appreciate just the personal help today on the episode as well. And I know it's super valuable. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, guys, if you have not left us a review on iTunes, head over, do that now. I love reading those reviews. It always makes my day. So head over there, leave a review, and I'll see you next week on another episode. Take care. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.